It happened last weekend, and I still can't wrap my head around any of it being real. My boys had been trying to set me up on a blind date for a solid 3 months. Every time we got together, they'd bring it up. And every single time, I'd shoot it down. Blind dates always felt forced to me, like some awkward job interview but with more pressure. My dude Kevin wouldn't let it go, though. He kept saying he knew this woman who was perfect for me, that we had all this stuff in common, that I was crazy for not at least trying. I finally said yes just to get him off my back. I didn't think he was serious. Figured he'd forget by morning. Then Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Kevin saying the date was set for Sunday at 3. He sent an address for some cafe near the river in Austin. I actually laughed out loud when I read it. I texted back asking if this was another one of his jokes, because they'd pulled stuff before. One time they signed me up for a pottery class without telling me, and I spent 3 hours awkwardly failing at a clay bowl while some instructor kept sighing at me. Kevin swore up and down this was real. Said her name was Olivia and she was expecting me. I told him fine, but if this was a prank, he owed me barbecue for a year. Saturday came and went. I kept waiting for the text saying it was all a setup, but nothing came. Sunday morning, I woke up thinking there was no way I was actually going through with this. I spent most of the morning in my workshop. I'm an auto technician, and I've been rebuilding this old Ford Mustang for the past year and a half. I got so deep into replacing the fuel lines that I completely forgot about the whole date thing until my alarm went off at 2:30, reminding me I had somewhere to be. I stood there covered in grease, staring at my phone, debating whether to just ignore it. Then I thought about how Kevin would never let me live it down if I bailed. So I cleaned up, changed into jeans and a fresh shirt, and drove to the cafe, fully expecting to walk into some elaborate joke. The place was called Riverbend Coffee, and it sat right on the water with these huge windows and wooden tables that looked like they'd been there forever. It was packed for a Sunday afternoon, families and couples everywhere. I ordered a black coffee and found a table near the window where I could watch the door. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Kevin to text, and admit this was all a setup. 3 o'clock came and went. No text, no call. I was about to leave when the door opened and she walked in. I'm not exaggerating when I say everything around me just stopped. She had this curly hair pulled back in a loose bun, and she was wearing this flowy dress that was sage green with tiny yellow flowers on it. She had this calm confidence about her, like she was completely comfortable in her own skin. She looked around the cafe, and when her eyes landed on me, she smiled. Not a big, dramatic smile, but this soft, genuine one that made my chest feel tight. She walked straight over to my table, and I stood up so fast I almost knocked my coffee over. She said, "Are you Marcus?" And I nodded like an idiot. She laughed and said, "I'm Olivia, and I'm guessing we're both victims of the same setup." Her voice was warm and had this slight rasp to it that I immediately liked. I finally found my words and said, "Looks like our friends aren't on this together." She sat down across from me, and suddenly I forgot every reason I thought blind dates were a bad idea. We started talking and it didn't feel forced at all. She told me her friend Dana had been pushing her to do this for weeks. She thought it was a joke too, until Dana sent her my picture and the cafe address. I asked what she did for work, and she said she was a veterinary nurse at an animal hospital in South Austin. Her whole face lit up when she talked about the animals she worked with. I told her I was an auto tech and worked at a shop near downtown, but mostly I spent my free time restoring old cars. She leaned forward and asked what I was working on right now. I told her about the Mustang, and she actually seemed interested. She asked real questions about the engine and the color I was planning to use. Most people's eyes glaze over when I talk about cars, but she was genuinely curious. We talked for over an hour without even realizing it. She told me she grew up in a small town in West Texas and moved to Austin for school. She had a cat named Jasper, who was this orange tabby that she'd rescued from the clinic and apparently ran her entire household. I told her I'd always wanted a pet, but my landlord didn't allow them. She said that was a crime, and anyone who worked with their hands all day deserved to come home to something living. The way she said it made me smile, like she already understood something about me without me having to explain it. We ordered more coffee and kept talking. She asked about my family, and I told her about my dad who still lived in Houston and called me every Sunday without fail. She told me about her parents who ran a ranch back in her hometown and how she missed the landscape sometimes but couldn't live there again. Then she got quiet for a moment. I could tell something was shifting behind her eyes. She looked down at her coffee cup, running her finger along the rim. "My parents are kind of complicated," she said finally. I waited, not wanting to push. She looked up at me, and there was something vulnerable in her expression. They're not exactly progressive people. Growing up, I heard a lot of stuff that I didn't agree with. Stuff about race, about who people should be with. It's part of why I left, honestly. I needed to get away from that mindset. I nodded slowly, letting her words settle. I've had versions of this conversation before in different ways, with different people. There's always a moment when someone has to decide if they're going to tell you who they really are or if they're going to keep it surface level. Olivia kept going, like she needed to get it all out. My dad especially. He has these ideas about things that are just wrong. When I told them I was moving to Austin, he went on this whole thing about how the city would change me, make me forget where I came from. What he really meant was he was afraid I'd end up dating someone he wouldn't approve of. She looked at me directly then. I don't believe any of that. I never did. But I wanted you to know, because if we're going to keep talking, I need you to understand that I'm not them. I chose to leave. I chose to build something different. I sat there for a second, taking it in. Here was this woman I'd just met, laying out something real and raw, not knowing how I'd react. I could feel the weight of it, the risk she was taking. I said, "I appreciate you telling me that. It can't be easy to talk about." She let out a breath, like she'd been holding it. "It's not, but I figured better now than later." I told her about growing up in Houston, about being one of the few black kids in my neighborhood, about the conversations my dad had with me that I wished I never had to have, about how I learned early that some people would judge me before I even opened my mouth. She listened the same way she had when I talked about cars, like what I was saying actually mattered. At some point, I noticed the sun was starting to set outside, and the cafe was getting quieter. I checked my phone and realized we'd been sitting there for almost 3 hours. She noticed too, and her eyes went wide. She said she couldn't believe how fast the time went. I said, "Me neither," and I meant it. We walked outside together, and the air was cooling down. Her car was parked a few spots down from mine. We stood there in that awkward moment where neither of us wanted to say goodbye, but we didn't know what else to do. She broke the silence first and said she had a really good time. I said I did too, and asked if she wanted to do it again sometime. She smiled and said she'd like that. We exchanged numbers, and she gave me a quick hug before getting in her car. I watched her drive away and stood there in the parking lot trying to process what just happened. I got in my truck and immediately called Kevin. He picked up laughing and asked how it went. I told him I owed him way more than a year of barbecue. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her. The way she laughed, the way she listened, the way she looked at me across that table when she told me about her parents, like she was trusting me with something fragile. I kept replaying every moment of the conversation in my head. Around 10, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Olivia saying thanks for the coffee, and that she meant what she said about doing it again. I texted back right away saying I was free next weekend if she was. She said she was, and asked if I liked hiking. I said I did, even though I hadn't been in years. She sent me the name of a trail and said to meet her there Saturday morning at 9. I said I'd be there. The whole week dragged by. Work felt longer than usual. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was her. We texted back and forth a few times. Nothing heavy, just little things about our days. She sent me a picture of a kitten that came into the clinic, and I sent her a picture of the progress I made on the Mustang. It felt easy and natural, like we'd known each other way longer than we actually had. Saturday morning came, and I woke up earlier than I needed to. I changed clothes 3 times, trying not to look like I was trying too hard. I got to the trailhead 15 minutes early, and she was already there, leaning against her car, wearing hiking boots and a backpack. When she saw me, she waved, and I felt that same tightness in my chest from the coffee shop. We started up the trail and fell into step beside each other. The morning was cool and quiet except for birds and the sound of our boots on the dirt path. She told me she came here a lot to clear her head, that there was something about being on the trail that made everything else feel smaller. I understood exactly what she meant. We hiked for about an hour before stopping at a lookout point. The view stretched out for miles, hills and trees, and the city far in the distance. We sat on a rock and shared the water she brought. She asked me why I liked working on cars, and I told her the truth. That I liked taking something broken and making it whole again, that there was something satisfying about using my hands to create something that would last. She looked at me for a long moment and said that made sense, that she could tell I was the kind of person who fixed things. I asked what she meant, and she said some people just had that energy, the kind that made you feel like everything would be okay. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just looked out at the view and tried not to let her see how much her words affected me. We hiked back down the trail, and by the time we reached the parking lot, it was almost noon. My legs were tired, but in a good way. Olivia suggested we grab lunch at this diner she knew nearby. I said yes immediately because I wasn't ready for the day to end yet. The diner was one of those classic places with red booths and checkered floors. We slid into a corner booth and ordered burgers and fries. The waitress brought us waters, and Olivia told me this was her favorite spot when she first moved to Austin. She said she used to come here alone on weekends when she felt homesick. I asked if she still got homesick, and she nodded. She said sometimes she missed the wide open spaces of West Texas. The quiet, the way you could see every star at night. But then she'd remember why she left, and how she wanted to build her own life, and not just follow the path everyone expected her to take. I understood that more than I could explain. I told her I grew up in Houston, and everyone assumed I'd take over my uncle's construction business, but I wanted to work with cars, not houses. My dad didn't get it at first, but eventually he came around. Olivia smiled and said, "It takes courage to choose your own path, even when people don't understand." Our food came, and we ate and talked about everything. Favorite movies, worst first date stories, places we wanted to travel. She said she'd always wanted to see the coast, drive up the Pacific Coast Highway, and camp on the beaches. I told her I'd never been either, but it sounded amazing. She got quiet for a second, then asked if I thought our friends planned this whole thing because they knew we'd actually like each other, or if they just got lucky. I laughed and said probably a little of both. She said either way, she was glad they did it. That she almost didn't show up to the cafe because she thought it would be awkward. I admitted I almost didn't show up either. We sat there looking at each other, and I felt this pull, like something was shifting between us, something real. After lunch, we walked around downtown for a bit, just wandering with no real destination. We stopped at a bookstore and she showed me her favorite section, poetry and nature writing. I'd never been much of a reader, but the way she talked about books made me want to be. We ended up on a bench in a small park watching people walk by, families with kids, couples holding hands, dogs chasing frisbees. Olivia leaned back and closed her eyes, letting the sun hit her face. She looked so peaceful. I wanted to reach over and hold her hand, but I didn't want to rush anything. She opened her eyes and caught me staring. She smiled and asked what I was thinking. I told her the truth, that I was thinking about how I was supposed to hate blind dates, but this didn't feel like one. She said it didn't feel like one to her either. It felt like meeting someone you were supposed to meet. We sat there a while longer. Then she said she should probably get going. She had an early shift at the clinic the next morning. I walked her back to her car, and we stood there again in that same space where neither of us wanted to say goodbye. This time, she stepped closer and gave me a hug that lasted longer than the first one. I could smell her shampoo, something like coconut and vanilla. When she pulled back, she looked up at me, and for a second I thought about kissing her. But something stopped me. Maybe it was nerves. Maybe I just wanted to do this right. She squeezed my hand and said, "Text me later." I promised I would. I drove home feeling like I was floating. My apartment felt emptier than usual. I texted her when I got home saying I had an amazing day. She texted back right away saying she did too and that we should do it again soon. I said, "How about next weekend?" And she sent back a smiley face. The next few weeks were a blur of texts and calls and more dates. We went to a farmer's market and she bought flowers for her apartment. We saw a movie and shared popcorn in the back row. We cooked dinner at her place, and her cat Jasper decided I was his new best friend. Every time I saw her, it felt easier, more natural, like we were building something without even trying. One night, she invited me over and said she wanted to show me something. When I got there, she led me out to her tiny balcony. She had string lights hung up and candles lit. She said she'd been wanting to do this for a while, create a little space where she could sit and relax after long days. We sat out there talking until late. She told me more about her family, about how her parents worked hard their whole lives and taught her the value of showing up even when things got tough. But she also talked about the parts that were hard, the conversations she had to have with them about their beliefs, the way her dad would sometimes say things that made her cringe. She looked at me and said, "He doesn't know about you." "Not really. I've mentioned I'm seeing someone, but I haven't told him anything specific. I'm scared of how he'll react." I reached over and took her hand. I told her I understood, that I'd faced versions of that before, and that whatever happened, we'd deal with it together. She squeezed my hand and said, "You're the first person I've been with that I actually want to bring home. And that terrifies me because I don't know if they'll be the people I need them to be." I told her that wasn't on her, that she wasn't responsible for their choices. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there in the quiet, the string lights glowing above us. Things between us kept growing after that night. We started spending more time together during the week. She'd come to the shop after work and sit on a stool while I worked on the Mustang. She'd hand me tools and ask questions, and make me laugh when I got frustrated. I'd stop by the clinic on my lunch breaks, and she'd show me whatever animals were there that day. One Saturday, she asked if I wanted to meet her friends. She was having a small get-together at her apartment and wanted me there. I said yes, even though I was nervous. Meeting her friends felt like a big step, like this was becoming something real and official. I showed up with beer and tried not to feel out of place. Her friends were nice, though. They asked about my work and seemed genuinely interested. Kevin was there too with his girlfriend, and he kept giving me these looks like he was proud of himself for setting us up. Olivia stayed close to me the whole night. She'd touch my arm when she laughed or lean against me when we sat on the couch. It felt natural, like we'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. Later that night, after everyone left, we cleaned up together. She was washing dishes and I was drying, and she asked if I had fun. I told her I did, that her friends were cool. She smiled and said they really liked me, that Dana told her I seemed like a good guy. I asked what she thought, and she turned to look at me. She said she thought I was more than good, that I was exactly what she didn't know she was looking for. I set down the dish towel and pulled her close. I kissed her, and she kissed me back. When we pulled apart, she said she was falling for me. My heart was racing, but I told her I was falling for her too. She looked relieved, like she'd been scared to say it first. Everything felt perfect until it wasn't. A few days later, Olivia got a phone call that changed everything. I was at her place, and we were making dinner when her phone rang. She looked at the screen, and her whole face changed. She answered and walked into her bedroom. I could hear her voice through the door getting more stressed. When she came back out, she looked shaken. She sat down on the couch, and I sat next to her. She told me that was her mom. Her dad had a heart attack and was in the hospital back in West Texas. He was stable, but her mom was overwhelmed and needed help. Olivia said she had to go home. I told her of course she did, and asked what I could do. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said she didn't know how long she'd be gone, that her parents might need her to stay for a while to help with the ranch. I pulled her into my arms and told her we'd figure it out. That distance didn't change how I felt. I drove her to the airport the next morning. We didn't talk much on the way there. She was too worried about her dad, and I didn't want to make things harder. At the terminal, I hugged her tight and told her to call me when she landed. She promised she would. The first week she was gone was hard. We texted when we could, but she was busy taking care of her dad and helping her mom. I threw myself into work to keep my mind off missing her. I finished the fuel lines on the Mustang and started on the upholstery. But every night, I'd get home to my empty apartment and wished she was there. She called me one night sounding exhausted. She said her dad was doing better, but recovery was going to take months. Her mom couldn't handle the ranch alone, and Olivia felt torn. Part of her wanted to come back to Austin, but part of her felt like she needed to stay. I asked her what she wanted to do. She said she didn't know, that she felt guilty no matter what choice she made. I told her she didn't have to decide right now, that I'd be here either way. She got quiet, then asked if I really meant that. I said, "Of course I did. Whatever you need to do, I'll support you." 2 more weeks went by. We talked less and less. She was busy and tired, and I could hear the stress in her voice every time we did talk. I started to worry that the distance was too much, that what we had wasn't strong enough to survive this. But then one Friday night, my phone rang. It was Olivia, and she was crying. I asked what was wrong, and she said everything. That her dad was recovering but slowly. That her mom needed her. That she missed Austin and her job and me. She said she felt like she was being pulled in 2 different directions, and she didn't know what to do. I told her to breathe, that she didn't have to have all the answers tonight. She said she was scared that if she stayed in West Texas too long, I'd move on, that we'd lose what we built. I told her that wasn't going to happen, that I wasn't going anywhere. She asked how I could be so sure. I told her because what we had was real, that I'd wait as long as it took. She cried harder and said she didn't deserve me. I said that wasn't true, that we deserved each other. After that phone call, something shifted. Olivia and I started talking more honestly about what we wanted. She told me she needed to stay in West Texas for at least another month to make sure her dad was stable. I told her I understood and that I'd come visit her if she wanted. Her voice brightened immediately, and she said she'd love that. 2 weeks later, I drove 8 hours to her family's ranch. The landscape changed as I got closer. Wide open fields and hills in the distance. When I pulled up to the property, Olivia was waiting on the porch. She ran down the steps, and I caught her in my arms. She held on tight and whispered that she missed me so much. Meeting her parents was intimidating. Her dad was still recovering, but he shook my hand firmly and thanked me for making the drive. Her mom hugged me and said she'd heard a lot about me. I could feel them studying me, taking me in. I didn't miss the way her dad's eyes lingered on me a beat longer than they might have on someone else. That night, we all had dinner together. The conversation was careful, polite. Her dad asked about my work, nodded along as I explained about the shop and the Mustang. Her mom asked about my family. I could feel Olivia's tension across the table, like she was waiting for something to go wrong. After dinner, Olivia and I walked out to the barn. She showed me the horses and told me stories about growing up here. She said this place would always be home, but Austin was where she built her life, where she found herself, where she found me. I asked her what she was going to do when her dad was better. She said she'd been thinking about that a lot. She turned to face me in the dim light of the barn. She said she realized something while we were apart, that missing me hurt more than anything else, that she didn't want to keep choosing between her family and her life in Austin. She wanted both. I asked her how that would work. She said she talked to her parents about hiring help for the ranch, someone who could take over the heavy work so her dad could recover without the stress. She said it would take time to find the right person, but once they did, she could go back to Austin, back to her job, back to me. I pulled her close and told her I was proud of her, that figuring out how to take care of everyone, including herself, took strength. She rested her head against my chest and said she couldn't have done it without me, that knowing I was waiting made everything easier. Before I left, her dad asked to talk to me alone. We sat on the porch, looking out at the land. He was quiet for a long time, then said, "I know I'm not the easiest person to talk to. I got my ways, my beliefs. Been that way my whole life." I waited. He said, "My daughter loves you. I can see it. And I can see you love her. That's not nothing." He looked at me directly. "I ain't saying I understand everything. I ain't saying I agree with everything. But I'm saying if you treat her right, if you make her happy, then that's what matters." Took me almost losing everything to figure that out. I nodded and said, "I appreciate that, sir." I do love her. I'll take care of her. He nodded back, and we sat there in the quiet. 6 weeks later, Olivia came home. I picked her up from the airport, and the moment I saw her, everything felt right again. We drove back to her apartment, and Jasper went crazy when he saw her. We spent the whole night catching up, talking and laughing and holding each other. She told me her dad was doing much better, that they found someone to help with the ranch, and her mom was relieved. Olivia said she could finally breathe again, that she felt like she could move forward instead of being stuck. Over the next few months, we fell back into our routine, but it felt deeper now. We'd been tested and we made it through. She started talking about the future more, about trips we could take, and places we wanted to see together. One night, while we were working on the Mustang, she asked me where I saw us in a year. I told her the truth, that I saw us together, maybe living together, maybe planning that California coast trip she always talked about. She smiled and said that sounded perfect. Then she said she loved me, not falling anymore, but completely and fully in love with me. I set down my wrench and looked at her. I told her I loved her too, that from the moment she walked into that coffee shop, my life got better, that what started as a joke turned into the realest thing I'd ever had. She kissed me right there in my garage, covered in grease and surrounded by car parts. And I knew this was it. This was the person I wanted to build a life with. Our friends were right all along. Sometimes the best things come from taking a chance on something you think is a joke.